I'm Margaret, 34 female. I live in a quiet city center apartment that I bought myself 2 years ago, and I work as a senior project manager for a tech firm, a job that suits my meticulous, planning-oriented nature. For most of my life, I believed my role was to be the stable, responsible anchor in a family that seemed to drift on whims and social appearances. It turns out, my real role was to be their bank, their safety net, and their secret shame all at once. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family operated on a complex, unspoken system of obligations and expectations, a web I spent more than 3 decades trying to navigate. At the center of this web were my parents, Isabel and Arthur. My mother, a woman whose public persona as a community organizer was built on a foundation of charm and expertly wielded guilt, saw the world in terms of appearances. My father, a retired accountant, was a man of quiet calculations, both financial and emotional. His silence was his most powerful tool. It could feel like calm approval or cold condemnation, and it was often impossible to tell the difference. Then there was my Uncle Julian, my mother's brother, a man who had coasted through life on a series of consulting gigs that never seemed to consult on anything tangible, yet he always managed to live comfortably. And then there was me, Margaret, the project manager, the one with the stable career, the excellent credit score, and the quiet, drama-free life they alternately relied on and seemed to resent. I was the family's designated driver, both literally and metaphorically. When Uncle Julian's latest venture needed a small, interest-free loan to get off the ground, I was the one who provided it. When my parents wanted the latest tech gadget or a subscription to a premium streaming bundle, my credit card was the one on file because it was just easier that way. I was the emergency contact, the financial backstop, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries with thoughtful gifts they would accept with a polite, slightly distant smile. Our family's crown jewel, the physical embodiment of our shared history, was a cabin nestled by a lake 3 hours north of the city. My grandfather, my father's father, had built it with his own hands. It was rustic, smelled of pine and wood smoke, and was supposed to be a legacy for all of us. After he passed, it fell into a state of disrepair. My parents and uncle talked a great game about fixing it up, but no one ever seemed to have the time or the funds. So 5 years ago, I had stepped in. I drew up a project plan, budgeted for materials, and spent nearly every weekend for a year managing contractors and doing much of the work myself. I replaced the roof, updated the plumbing, refinished the floors, and installed a new kitchen. I did it because I loved my grandfather, and I loved the idea of what the cabin was supposed to represent, a place of belonging. Once it was restored to its former glory, and then some, it became their favorite getaway. They would host friends, throw summer parties, and post endless photos on social media, tagging the location with a proud flourish. My contributions were never mentioned. I was the silent partner, the behind-the-scenes producer of their idyllic family life. When I did join them, which was rare due to my work schedule, I felt more like a guest than a part-owner of the legacy I had single-handedly resurrected. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere when I was there. A subtle tension, as if my presence was an inconvenient reminder of the truth. The brunch invitation arrived on a Tuesday via the family group chat. It was a single, cheerful message from my mother. "Family brunch this Sunday at the Gilded Sparrow. My treat. Let me know who can make it." The Gilded Sparrow was one of those places that was more expensive than it was good, a restaurant designed for being seen. I hadn't seen them in over a month, a period of blissful, quiet productivity for me. My first instinct was to decline. I had a major project deadline approaching, and a peaceful Sunday spent working from home sounded far more appealing than navigating the minefield of my family's passive aggression. But a small, foolish part of me, a part I thought I had extinguished years ago, flickered with hope. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe my recent promotion, which I had briefly mentioned to my dad on the phone, had earned me a new level of respect. Maybe my mother, in her own way, was trying to reach out. I typed out a reply. "Sounds lovely. I can be there." The response from my mother was an immediate thumbs-up emoji. No words. Just a tiny, digital affirmation that felt disproportionately cold. For the rest of the week, a low-grade anxiety simmered beneath surface. I replayed past gatherings in my head, the small slights and backhanded compliments that were their primary mode of communication with me. "Margaret, you work so hard. It's a shame you don't have more time for a social life," my mother would say, patting my hand with pity. "Mags, you should let me give you some investment advice. You're good at saving, but you need to make your money work for you," my uncle would offer, conveniently forgetting the multiple loans he had yet to repay. My father would just watch, his expression unreadable, his silence a heavy blanket over the conversation. I decided to approach the brunch as a project. My objective, to remain calm, pleasant, and detached. I would not get drawn into arguments. I would not offer any personal information they could later use as ammunition. I would eat my overpriced eggs Benedict, smile politely, and leave. It was a solid plan, one that felt safe and manageable. On Sunday morning, I chose my outfit with care, a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was professional, understated, and screamed, "I am perfectly fine on my own." It was armor. As I drove to the restaurant, I practiced my neutral expression in the rearview mirror. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, the same calm I felt before a major presentation at work. I was prepared. I had my strategy. But as I pulled into the valet, I saw them already seated at a prime patio table, laughing and sipping mimosas. And as I walked towards them, I saw the laughter die in my mother's eyes, her smile tightening just enough for me to notice. The project, I realized with a sinking heart, was destined to fail from the start. The invitation was never about inclusion, it was a summons, and I had foolishly walked right into the trap. The Gilded Sparrow was buzzing with the performative leisure of Sunday brunch. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hollandaise sauce. As I approached the table, my Uncle Julian was the first to see me. His face, a little too tanned for the season, split into a wide grin. "There she is, the workaholic herself, gracing us with her presence," he boomed, loud enough for the neighboring tables to turn their heads. I gave a tight smile. "Hello, Julian." My father, Arthur, simply nodded, his eyes flicking over my dress before returning to his menu. It was his standard greeting, a non-committal acknowledgement that I existed in his immediate vicinity. My mother, Isabel, however, waited until I had sat down before speaking. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands wrapped around her mimosa glass, and gave me a look that was a masterclass in condescension. "Margaret, darling," she began, her voice a sweet, cloying whisper. "So glad you could make it. We were just talking about the Henderson's son, you know, the lawyer. He's finally settling down. Found a lovely girl from a good family." I knew exactly what this was. It was a classic Isabel maneuver. Start with a piece of gossip that was tangentially related to my perceived failings, in this case, my single status. I refused to take the bait. "That's nice for them," I said, picking up my own menu. "What looks good here?" The conversation moved on, but the tone had been set. For the next hour, I was a spectator at my own family gathering. They talked about their friends, a planned vacation to the coast, and Julian's newest, brilliant business idea, some sort of artisanal dog food subscription box. They asked me no questions about my life or my job. When I tried to interject with a story about a recent work trip, my mother cut me off to point out a woman across the patio whose handbag she found tacky. It was a deliberate, systematic exclusion. They weren't ignoring me, they were actively curating a conversation that had no space for me in it. I was a foreign object, a piece of furniture that happened to be sitting at their table. I focused on my plan: stay calm, be pleasant, and remain detached. I ate my eggs Benedict, which were disappointingly lukewarm. I sipped my coffee. I nodded along to their stories, offering non-committal sounds of agreement when required. The entire time, a cold, heavy knot was forming in my stomach. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a profound and hollow sadness. The hope I had foolishly harbored earlier that week felt like a cruel joke. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, but with a quiet, devastating sentence. Julian was laughing about how they needed to get a new sound system for the cabin. "The one in there is ancient. We need something with Bluetooth for our parties," he said, looking at my parents. "We'll have to look into it," my father said, glancing at me for a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting look, but I knew what it meant. It was the Margaret will handle it look. She paid for the cabin's Wi-Fi and security system. What was one more expense? That's when my mother, Isabel, set her mimosa down. She looked directly at me, her expressi on unburdened by any hint of kindness. It was a look of pure, unadulterated assessment, as if she were evaluating a piece of livestock. "We're just being nice inviting you, you know," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the ambient chatter of the restaurant. "Don't fool yourself into thinking you actually matter to these plans." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering with malice. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversations, the distant traffic, it all faded away. There was only my mother's face, her eyes holding mine, and the crushing weight of her statement. My Uncle Julian chuckled. It wasn't a loud, booming laugh, but a short, breathy huff of amusement, as if my mother had just told a clever joke at my expense. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes twinkling with mirth. My dad didn't say a word. He looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the remnants of his omelet. His silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was confirmation. It was agreement. It was the final, brutal nail in the coffin of our relationship. In that instant, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving their approval, the part that made excuses for their behavior, the part that held onto the fantasy of a loving family, it all turned to dust. All that was left was a strange, icy calm. The knot of sadness in my stomach hardened into a diamond-sharp point of clarity. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't make a scene. That's what they would have wanted, what they expected. It would have proven their point, that I was overly emotional, difficult, a source of drama. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my now-cold coffee. I placed the cup back on the saucer with a soft click. I looked from my mother's smug face to my uncle's amused one, and finally to my father's averted gaze. I gave a single, quick nod. Acknowledgement. Then, without another word, I placed my napkin on the table, pushed my chair back, and stood up. I turned and walked away, my posture perfect, my steps even. I didn't look back. I could feel their eyes on me, their shock radiating across the patio. I had broken the script. I walked through the restaurant, past the curious glances of other diners, and out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. I handed my ticket to the valet, my hand perfectly steady. The calm held until I was inside my car, the doors locked, the engine running. And then, as I pulled out of the parking lot, the first tear traced a hot path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage. The words echoed in my head, not as an insult, but as a release. "Don't fool yourself into thinking you actually matter." "Okay," I whispered to the empty car, my voice raw. "I won't." The world hadn't been broken. It had been clarified. And in that sharp, painful clarity, a new project was beginning to take shape. The drive home was a blur. The icy calm that had carried me out of the restaurant slowly receded, replaced by waves of emotion, hurt, rage, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I parked my car in my designated spot, went up to my apartment, and walked straight to my home office. The room was my sanctuary, a space of order and control. The walls were lined with books and project charts. My desk was clean, organized, everything in its place. It was the antithesis of the emotional chaos my family created. For a long time, I just stood in the center of the room, replaying the scene at the brunch. My mother's cruel words, my uncle's snickering laugh, my father's damning silence. It wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of 1,000 smaller cuts, a lifetime of being treated as a utility rather than a daughter. The responsible one, the capable one, the one they could always count on to solve the problems they couldn't be bothered to fix themselves. They had built a comfortable life on the foundation of my competence, all while looking down on me for it. The grief was paralyzing, but my rage was a catalyst. As a project manager, my instinct when faced with a crisis is not to panic, but to assess, gather data, and formulate a plan. The hurt was the problem statement. The rage was the motivation. Now I needed the data. I sat down at my desk and powered on my computer. My first stop was the shared family cloud storage, a service I paid for, of course. It was a digital dumping ground for old photos, documents, and financial records. My father, the meticulous retired accountant, had insisted on digitizing everything years ago. He thought it was for organization and preservation. He never imagined his own daughter would one day use it for forensic accounting of their betrayals. My target was clear: anything and everything related to shared finances and assets. I started with the joint credit line. Years ago, my parents had convinced me to open a credit card with a high limit and add them as authorized users. "It's for emergencies, Margaret," my mother had said, her voice dripping with sincerity. "You're so much better with these things than we are." I was made the primary account holder, which meant the ultimate responsibility for the debt was mine. At the time, I saw it as a gesture of trust. Now I saw it for what it was: a risk-free line of credit for them, secured by my good name. I pulled up the statements. There were no major purchases, just a steady stream of smaller ones: online shopping, expensive dinners, subscription services, gas for their cars. It was the credit card of a leisurely lifestyle, paid off every month by an automatic transfer from my bank account. There was no emergency, just entitlement. Next, I turned my attention to the cabin. This was the heart of it all. The place I had poured my time, money, and love into, only to be treated like an intruder. I navigated to a folder labeled Lake House Estate. Inside were scanned copies of deeds, property tax records, and my grandfather's original will. I read through the will first, a document I hadn't seen in years. My grandfather, a man who valued fairness above all else, had left the cabin not to his son, but to a family trust. My father, Arthur, was named the trustee. But then I found the amendment. A document dated a few years after the will, when my grandfather's health had started to decline. It was a change to the structure of the trust itself. He had been worried about my father's passive nature and my uncle's recklessness. The amendment stipulated that upon my father reaching the age of 65 or retiring, whichever came later, the role of primary trustee would pass to a successor. If the successor was deemed financially solvent and of sound judgment, they would gain majority control over the trust's assets. My father had turned 65 6 months ago. He had retired last year. I scanned down the document, my heart pounding in my chest, to the line designating the successor. There, in my grandfather's elegant, looping script, was my name: Margaret Elizabeth Hayes. I leaned back in my chair, a slow breath escaping my lips. They didn't know, or if they did, they had forgotten. They had continued to operate as if my father was in charge, as if the cabin was theirs to use and leverage as they pleased. They saw me as the help, the person who fixed the roof and paid for the Wi-Fi. They never imagined that the grandfather I so closely resembled in temperament had seen the truth of their characters and, in his wisdom, had quietly handed me the keys to the kingdom. The trust documents gave me, as the new primary trustee, the authority to manage, lease, or liquidate any and all assets held within the trust for the preservation of its value or the betterment of the beneficiaries. The beneficiaries were listed as my father, my uncle, and myself. This meant 2 of the 3 beneficiaries could be outvoted. It meant I had the power. I had the legal, undeniable right to sell the cabin. Their cherished party house, their social status symbol, the place they planned to outfit with a new sound system at my expense, it was mine to control. A cold, exhilarating calm washed over me. This was no longer about emotion. This was a project. The objective: to surgically remove myself from their lives and reclaim what was rightfully mine: my finances, my assets, and my self-respect. They had made their position clear. I didn't matter. They were about to learn, in the clearest possible terms, how much the person who doesn't matter can affect the bottom line. I created a new folder on my secure personal drive, naming it Project Endgame. I downloaded every relevant document: the trust amendment, the credit card agreements, years of bank statements showing my payments for their expenses. I created a spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I cataloged every subscription, every shared plan, every financial entanglement. Each line item was a chain, and I was going to sever every single one. They had left a paper trail, a blueprint of their decades of exploitation, and they had handed it to a master planner. It was the most foolish mistake they had ever made. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, the events of the weekend still fresh in my mind. The initial shock had subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I had the legal documents, but I needed to be absolutely certain of my standing before I made a single move. Mistakes in the planning phase of a project lead to catastrophic failure during execution. This was a project I could not afford to fail. My first call was to Lena, my closest friend since college. We had navigated our early careers together, and she was now a brutally efficient corporate lawyer. She was the only person I knew who loved spreadsheets and legal clauses as much as I did. "Lena," I said when she answered, "I have a situation. It's personal, but I need your professional eyes on some documents." "How personal is personal?" she asked, her voice already shifting into work mode. "Are we talking bad date or need to hide a body?" "Let's call it familial excavation," I replied, a grim smile on my face. I sent her the encrypted files, the trust amendment, the will, the property deeds. We met for coffee an hour later at a small cafe far from my usual haunts. She had her tablet with her, the documents already highlighted and annotated. She took a sip of her latte and looked at me over the rim of her cup. Her expression was serious. "Margaret, this is ironclad. Your grandfather was a very smart man. He put your dad on a very short leash. The moment your father retired, effective control of this trust transferred to you. You are the primary trustee. You have full legal authority to manage its assets, and that includes selling the cabin." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. "And the beneficiaries clause, my father and uncle." "They are beneficiaries, yes," Lena confirmed. "Which means they are entitled to a share of the proceeds from any liquidation, as are you. The trust specifies an equal three-way split. But the decision to liquidate, that's yours and yours alone. They can't stop you. They could try to contest it in court, claim you're not acting in good faith, but," she smirked, "given that you'd be securing a significant financial payout for them from a non-income generating asset, their case would be tissue thin. You'd be acting in the financial interest of all beneficiaries." We spent another hour going over the details. Lena advised me on the cleanest way to proceed, the type of real estate agent to hire, one who specialized in discreet, off-market sales, and how to structure the distribution of funds to avoid any legal blowback. As I left the cafe, I felt a surge of power. The law was on my side. My grandfather from beyond the grave had given me the ultimate vote of confidence. But Lena's confirmation had unlocked a new, darker curiosity within me. It wasn't enough to know I had the power. I needed to understand the full scope of their deception. Why had they been so confident in their control over the cabin? Why had they treated me with such casual disdain if my name was on the one document that mattered most? The only possible answer was that they were either ignorant of the clause or, more likely, they had known about it and simply assumed I would never find out or act on it. They had underestimated me. That evening, I dove back into the digital archives. This time, I wasn't looking for legal documents, I was looking for correspondence. I searched the family cloud drive and my own email archives for keywords. Cabin, trust, Julian, loan. The results were sickening. I found an email chain from 8 months ago between my mother and father. The subject line was Julian's latest mess. My uncle, it turned out, was in deep financial trouble. His consulting business had collapsed, and he had significant debts. Isabel wrote, "Arthur, he needs our help. He's talking about taking a high-interest loan. We can't let that happen. It would be a disgrace." My father's reply was cautious. "Our liquid cash is tied up. The market is down. The only real asset is the cabin." Isabel's response came a few minutes later, and it made my blood run cold. Then we use the cabin. We can use it as collateral. Julian can get his loan, and we don't have to sell. Margaret will never know. She doesn't pay attention to these things. She's too busy with that little job of hers. As long as she can still use it for her quiet weekends, she'll be happy. My little job. The career that paid for their subscriptions, their dinners out, their sense of security. The job that had paid to restore the very cabin they were plotting to leverage without my knowledge. I kept digging. I found another thread between my father and my uncle. Julian was panicking about his creditors. Julian wrote, "Art, I'm sunk. Is the cabin plan a go? We need to move fast." My father's reply was the true betrayal. "Patience, Julian. There is the complication with the trust, with Margaret's name on it. We need to handle her carefully. We will bring it up with her eventually, frame it as a family decision. She will do it for the family. She always does." She always does. That was it. That was the core of their entire worldview. I wasn't a person to them. I was a tool, a resource, a predictable mechanism that could be manipulated with the right combination of guilt and feigned affection. The brunch, I now realized, wasn't just a casual Sunday gathering. It was likely the prelude to their big ask. They were reinforcing my position in the family hierarchy, reminding me of my place, before they presented their plan to use the cabin as collateral. They would have framed it as a test of my loyalty, a chance to finally prove I was a true part of the family by helping my uncle. My mother's cruel words were a calculated move, designed to make me so desperate for their approval that I would agree to anything. The pieces all clicked into place, forming a mosaic of breathtaking deceit. They hadn't forgotten about the trust amendment. They knew. They had been planning this for months. They had discussed my personality, my job, my emotional weaknesses, all in the service of exploiting me one more time. The rage I felt before was a flickering candle compared to the inferno that now consumed me. All the sadness, all the grief was burned away. There was no room for it anymore. My mission was no longer just about reclaiming my assets. It was about justice. It was about showing them what happens when you push a project manager too far. You don't just get a reaction, you get a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and utterly devastating response. I opened my Project Endgame spreadsheet. It was time to move from data collection to strategic planning. It was time to build the timeline. The 2 weeks following the brunch were the quietest and most intensely focused of my life. The rage didn't drive me to impulsive action. It refined itself into a laser-like precision. My apartment became a command center. My personal laptop, normally used for streaming movies and casual browse, became the terminal for dismantling my old life. I compartmentalized my emotions, packing them away into a locked box in the back of my mind. At work, I was the same efficient, cheerful Margaret. I hit my project deadline with time to spare. No one suspected that in my off hours, I was orchestrating the most important project of my career. I named the operation Project Phoenix because it was about burning the old structure to the ground so something new could rise from the ashes. I created a project charter, a risk assessment matrix, and a detailed timeline with dependencies and milestones. This might have seemed like overkill to an outsider, but it was how my mind worked. It was how I imposed order on chaos. Milestone 1: liquidation of Asset Alpha, the cabin. This was the most critical and complex part of the plan. I followed Lena's advice and found a real estate lawyer who specialized in discrete trust sales. His name was Mr. Davies, a stern, older gentleman who communicated almost entirely via short, formal emails. He was perfect. I explained the situation. As the primary trustee, I was exercising my authority to liquidate a trust asset for the financial benefit of all beneficiaries. I provided him with all the necessary documentation. He reviewed it and confirmed my legal standing without a single question about family dynamics. Mr. Davies had a network of cash buyers looking for vacation properties. Within 3 days, he brought me a phenomenal, all-cash offer from a wealthy couple looking for a private lakeside retreat. The offer was well above the appraised value, and the buyers were willing to close in 10 business days, waiving most contingencies. It was clean, fast, and far more lucrative than I could have hoped. I signed the purchase agreement via a secure digital portal. The clock was now officially ticking. Milestone 2, severing financial tethers. While the cabin sale was in escrow, I moved on to the financial entanglements. I opened the spreadsheet I had created, a long list of shared expenses and accounts. I tackled them one by one with the cold efficiency of an auditor. First, the joint credit line. This was the family's slush fund. I logged into the online portal. The balance was a few $100s, a dinner my parents had enjoyed the previous week, a new gadget for my uncle. I paid it off in full from my personal account. Then I navigated to the account settings and found the option, Close Account. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure? You will lose your credit history and all associated benefits." I clicked Confirm without a moment's hesitation. A confirmation screen appeared. The account was closed, effective immediately. The safety net was gone. Next, the subscriptions. This was death by 1,000 cuts. The premium family streaming bundle with all the sports channels my dad and uncle loved. Cancelled. The cloud storage plan holding all their precious digital photos. Downgraded to the free, tiny 5 GB plan, effective at the end of the billing cycle. I had already downloaded my own copies of everything I wanted to keep. The smart home security system for my parents' house, which I had installed and paid the monthly fee for, cancelled. They would receive an email notification in the morning. The music streaming family plan, cancelled. The Amazon Prime account they all used for free shipping. I changed the password and removed their saved addresses and credit cards. Each cancellation was a quiet, satisfying click. Each one was a brick being removed from the wall of my servitude. They had taken my financial support for granted, viewing it as an unending RCE. They were about to learn that resources have a source, and that source could turn off the tap. Milestone 3, Communication Protocol. The final phase of the plan was to prepare for the inevitable fallout. I knew that once the consequences began to cascade, my phone would explode. I had no intention of engaging in a screaming match or a tearful, manipulative conversation. I needed a clear, concise, and non-negotiable statement. I drafted an email. It was simple, professional, and devoid of emotion. Subject regarding recent changes. To my family. Following the conversation at brunch on date, I have taken some time to reassess my role and financial contributions to the family. As of today, I have closed the joint credit line and canceled all personal subscriptions and services that I have been funding. Furthermore, as the legal primary trustee of my grandfather's estate, I have acted in the best financial interest of all beneficiaries by accepting an offer to sell the lake cabin. The sale is final. Per the terms of the trust, the proceeds will be split equally between the 3 named beneficiaries, Arthur, Julian, and myself. A check for your third of the proceeds will be sent to you by the trust's legal representative within 30 days. This was not an easy decision, but it was a necessary one, prompted by the clarification that I do not matter to your plans. I am now making my own. This is the last communication I will be having on this matter. Any attempts to contact me will be ignored. I wish you all the best. Sincerely, Margaret. I saved the draft. I would not send it. I would hold it, ready to be deployed only when they made the first move. They would initiate the confrontation, and I would end it with a single click. On the 10th business day, I received an email from Mr. Davies. The subject line was simply, "Sale of property address closed." The funds were being wired to the trust account he had set up. It was done. The cabin they all cherished, the cabin they had plotted to use behind my back, was sold. I had closed their credit line. I had canceled their perks. I sat at my desk, my apartment silent around me. I felt no joy, no triumphant glee. I just felt quiet. The project was complete. All dependencies were resolved. All milestones were achieved. Now all that was left was the final phase, stakeholder notification. I waited. That night, my phone, which had been silent for 2 weeks, lit up with the first confused message in the family group chat. It was from my Uncle Julian. "Hey, did the Netflix password change?" And so it began. The first message from Julian was a small pebble tossed into a still pond. I watched it appear on my phone's lock screen and felt nothing. I had anticipated this exact sequence of events. My project plan had included a user impact section, and loss of streaming service access was the first item on the list. An hour later, another message, this time from my mother. "Margaret, the security system app says our service is canceled. Is there an issue with your card? Please fix it." The "please fix it" was not a request. It was a command, laced with the casual assumption that I existed to solve her technical difficulties. I ignored it. I made myself a cup of tea and sat down with a book I'd been meaning to read. My phone buzzed again, and again. The group chat was waking up. "Julian, my card was just declined at the gas station. It was the joint one. What's going on?" "Isabel, Arthur, call Margaret. Something is wrong." The pond was no longer still. The ripples were turning into waves. I watched the notifications pile up, a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and rising panic. They were like people in a blackout, flicking useless switches and wondering why the lights wouldn't come on. It never occurred to them that someone had intentionally cut the power at the source. The real explosion came 2 hours later. It was a message from Julian, but this one was different. The tone had shifted from confusion to pure, unadulterated fury. "Julian, the cabin. I was showing a friend the online listing for a place nearby and I saw it. Our cabin. It's marked as sold. What did you do?" The message was in all caps. The waves had become a tsunami. My phone immediately began to ring. It was my mother. I silenced the call. It rang again, my father. I silenced it. My uncle. Silence. An endless barrage of calls and a flood of increasingly frantic messages in the group chat. "Margaret, you answer your phone right now. This is a mistake. This has to be some kind of horrible mistake. I'm going to kill her." That one was from Julian. I let them burn themselves out for a full hour. I let their panic and rage crescendo without an audience. This was part of the plan, too. Engaging with them in that state would be pointless. I had to wait for the moment they were desperate enough for answers to actually listen. Finally, a call came from a number I did recall. "Nice," I hesitated, then answered. It was my father calling from a neighbor's phone. His voice was strained, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Margaret, why haven't you been answering? What is going on? Your mother is beside herself. Julian is on his way over here. They're saying you sold the cabin." His tone was accusatory, as if I were a child who had broken a priceless vase. I took a slow, steadying breath. It was time. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly calm and level. "Yes, I did." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You, what? You can't, you have no right." "Actually," I said, and the words felt like cool, smooth stones in my mouth, "I have every right. Grandfather's trust amendment made me the primary trustee upon your retirement. I have the sole authority to manage the trust's assets, and I decided that the best way to manage that particular asset was to liquidate it." I could hear his sharp intake of breath. He knew about the amendment. My discovery of the emails had confirmed it. He just never thought I would use it. "This is insane," he stammered. "Why would you do this to your family?" "Which family is that?" I asked, my voice remaining unnervingly serene. "The one that I am a part of, or the one that I am simply a convenient utility for? You all made my position very clear 2 weeks ago. I was told, and I quote, 'Don't fool yourself into thinking you actually matter.' So I stopped. I took that advice to heart. While he was processing this, I opened my laptop, pulled up the email draft I had prepared, and added their email addresses to the to field. "But Margaret, the cabin, it was your grandfather's legacy," he pleaded, his voice cracking. This, I knew, was an appeal to my sentimentality, the weapon they had used against me for years. But it was useless now. Grandfather's legacy was not a building, Dad. It was a lesson in prudence and foresight. He saw the truth of this family, and he put a contingency plan in place. That contingency plan was me. I continued, I've also closed the joint credit account and canceled the various subscriptions I was paying for. You're all on your own now. You're destroying this family, he yelled, his composure finally breaking. I could hear my mother sobbing hysterically in the background. No, I said calmly. I'm not. I'm just resigning from my position as its financier and caretaker. There's a difference. With my finger hovering over the mouse, I said, check your email. I've sent you a full summary. It will explain everything, including the details about the distribution of the sale proceeds. You'll be receiving your share shortly. And with that, I clicked send. I have to go now, I said into the phone. I have nothing more to say about this. Goodbye, Arthur. I hung up before he could respond. Then I went into my phone settings and one by one I blocked their numbers. My mother, my father, my uncle. I left the family group chat, the final notification reading, Margaret has left the group. My phone fell silent. The storm had passed over me and I was in the quiet eye. The fallout would continue, of course. There would be drama, recriminations, attempts to reach me through other people. But the primary engagement was over. The project was complete. I sat in the profound silence of my apartment, the only sound the gentle hum of my refrigerator. I had done it. I had cauterized the wound. The silence that followed was both deafening and deeply peaceful. In the first few days, I braced for an ambush. I half expected my mother to show up at my apartment building, demanding entry, or my uncle to appear at my office. But they didn't. Their primary weapons, guilt, manipulation, and control, all delivered via my phone, had been neutralized. Without a direct line to me, their power was surprisingly limited. The news of the fallout came in trickles, mostly through Lena, who had a few distant connections to my family's social circle. The story they were spinning was that I had suffered some sort of mental breakdown. I had become unstable, acting erratically, and had spitefully sold the cabin and cut them off out of jealousy. It was a predictable narrative, one designed to paint me as the villain and them as the long-suffering victims of a daughter's inexplicable meltdown. For a moment, a flicker of the old anger returned. How dare they try to paint me as unwell for simply holding them accountable? But the anger faded quickly. Their stories didn't matter anymore. Their opinions were echoes from a room I had already left, the door firmly locked behind me. People could believe what they wanted. The facts were on my side, and more importantly, my peace of mind no longer depended on their approval. About a month later, a certified letter arrived from Mr. Davies' office. It contained a copy of the final settlement for the trust and a cashier's check made out to me for 1/3 of the cabin's sale price. It was a substantial amount of money, more than I had ever seen in one place. I knew that 2 identical checks had been mailed to my father and my uncle. Lena had been right. By liquidating the asset, I had given them a significant financial windfall. This fact, I later heard, had complicated their victim narrative. It was difficult to convincingly portray someone as a villain when they had just handed you a life-changing amount of money. The funds changed nothing for me. I deposited the check, met with a financial advisor, and invested it wisely. My life continued as it had before. I went to my job, I saw my friends, I enjoyed the quiet solitude of my apartment. The only difference was an absence. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire life was gone. I hadn't realized how much energy I had been expending just managing my family until it was no longer required. I felt lighter. The real changes were on their end. Without my financial padding, their lifestyle took an immediate and dramatic hit. Uncle Julian's grand plans for his artisanal dog food business evaporated. Without the cabin as collateral and no more loans from me, his creditors closed in. He had to sell his car and move into a small, rented apartment. My parents felt the impact in smaller, more insidious ways. They had to start paying for their own subscriptions. They had to budget for dinners out. My mother's status as a generous host and community organizer was diminished without the cabin as her stage and my funds as her backstop. The biggest blow, however, was the loss of control. They had lost their power over me, and in doing so, they had lost the central organizing principle of their lives. 6 months after the phone call, I got an email from an unknown address. It was from my father. It was short and, for him, shockingly direct. Margaret, I hope this email finds you well. Your mother and I have been talking. We understand that we made mistakes. We miss you. We would like to see you to talk things through. Love, Dad. I read the email several times. There was no apology, not really. We made mistakes is a passive, vague admission, a world away from I am sorry for what I did. It was an attempt to open the door, to see if the old key still worked. A year ago, I would have leaped at this crumb of affection. I would have agreed to meet, hoping for a real reconciliation, and the cycle would have started all over again. But I was a different person now. I had excavated the ruins of my family life and found that the foundations were rotten from the start. You cannot build a healthy structure on a toxic foundation. You have to walk away and build somewhere new. I thought about my grandfather, about the quiet foresight in his will. He hadn't just given me legal power, he had given me an escape route. He had trusted me to know when to use it. Selling the cabin wasn't destroying his legacy, it was fulfilling it. The legacy was my freedom. I moved the email to a new folder I had created, labeled Archive. I didn't reply, I didn't delete it. I simply filed it away, a relic from a past life. My life today is my own. It is a project of my own design, built on a foundation of self-respect. I have a new family of sorts, Lena and a close-knit group of friends who value me for who I am, not for what I can provide. There are no unspoken obligations, no emotional landmines. There is only mutual respect and genuine affection. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that brunch. I think about my mother's cold eyes and my father's silence. It no longer hurts. It feels like a scene from a movie I once saw about a character I used to know. The revenge wasn't in selling the cabin or cutting off their credit. That was just the mechanism. The true victory wasn't loud and explosive. It was the quiet, profound peace that came after. It was the freedom of no longer needing to matter to them, because I finally, truly mattered to myself. The rubble of my old life is in the past, and what I am building now, for the first time, is home.